Now we come to the last section in the Events tab, the people involved. So effectively, who are the perpetrators and who are the targets? Now, for our particular purposes, Halifax is not a very useful article for this because there's no mention of any perpetrators or any targets, which does suggest that we can't use this. So let's just pretend that the rioters were of the candidate Smith and targeted the Blues. Now, what this effectively means is we can add an actor. So the rioters were supporters of the candidate Smith. So sometimes the article will not tell you what party the candidate is for. Now, if we're lucky, the perpetrators will say there is a Conservative mob, or perhaps that the Conservative candidate threw a punch. But sometimes they won't say that, in which case they might say instead that supporters of the candidate Smith, they might be called Smithians or Ripleyites or anything like that, in which case we would code that as partisan generic there. So we know they're partisan, but we don't know what type of partisan they are, which means I can type in the comment box there that they are in favour of candidate Smith. So that way we can then go back to this coding later and do some extra research and find out what party Smith was for, and therefore what party the mob supporting him was for. There's no need for you to do this research yourself on Google or anything like that. That's something we do later on. So we know that the perpetrator was partisan. Now, sometimes this can be contested. Sometimes there will be an article that says it said that the mob was in favour of the candidate Smith, but we would suggest that it was both sides, in which case it would be contested. Now, a mob would be an other in this one. So there is a partisan allegiance and then a type of people/person for this partisan allegiance. So as you can see, a mob would be other. Now occasionally you will get material on individuals, their name, their occupation, where they live, their age, all of that sort of thing. We don't really need to know any of that at all, which makes it a lot easier for you wading through sometimes very difficult and lengthy articles. If it's John Smith and a lot of extra detail on John Smith, but John Smith is not a candidate, a party activist, or a municipal official, then John Smith can just be coded as partisan other. Now, if there's no mention at all of any partisan allegiance, then you would code as non-partisan, and it seems likely that this will be the most common thing that you do code during the coding process of electoral violence articles, because most people won't be mentioned what partisan type they are, or that they are a candidate, party activist, or municipal official, so non-partisan other. Now, we know that our rioters were supporters of the candidate Smith. We know that this wasn't contested. We've got in favour of candidate Smith. We can then add a second actor, which is the target. Now, occasionally there may be more than one perpetrator. So say there were supporters of the candidate Smith and others. But say it just says others, and you don't know whether or not they're partisan. They would therefore be non-perpetrator, non-partisan, other. So the targets were the Blues. Now sometimes it will refer to people by colours to indicate what party they were for, like red for Labour, yellow for Liberal Democrat, and blue for Labour. Now unfortunately each constituency in the 19th century had its own separate colour system, which means that you can't judge a party by the colour that it's given in the 19th century. So if it says Blues, you would just have to code this as target and then partisan generic again, so we can ignore Liberals, Labour, Radicals, etc. And then they are other because nothing's mentioned. Now say for instance targeted the Blues and the blue candidate, in which case we can add as a second target as a target, generic partisan because they're blue, and then candidate. So then we can just put blue candidate here. Now say that we know that the blue candidate was named Jones. We should also put that in, and whenever you record a candidate as either a perpetrator or target, you should put their name in the comment box to make it easier for us to pinpoint who they are later on in the process. I should also mention here that in cases where there are multiple actors of the same type, by which I mean, say they talk about John Jones and Jim Smith, but both are partisan others, you don't need to code that twice because they both exist in the same group. So say Smith and Jones are both perpetrators, partisans, and others. Now, because they're in the same category, you don't need to put this in twice because we're not recording any individual information about them. The only one in which you would record things individually is for the candidates themselves. Finally, you'll notice this bit here, actor generic. Now, you might be tempted to record that the Chief Constable was present, that the Mayor was also a witness to the violence, that perhaps a district chairman came across the violence and commented on it. Now, the problem with that is you'd be recording things until the cows came home, because that is a lot of these articles have a lot of bystanders. So effectively, this actor generic option here is to be used very sparingly indeed. If there's a generic actor who's neither a perpetrator or target, but is somehow very significant in terms of the course of the event, then by all means record them, but otherwise anybody who's not a perpetrator or target can generally be ignored, which makes both coding and reading complex articles much faster for you.